Welcome everybody, Your Royal Highness, Lords, ladies and gentlemen, to this fantastic setting here to be discussing waste to wealth. 200,000 tonnes of material come through here every year. What better place could there be to really get our minds thinking about the difficulties that we need to face? As that film showed, the linear economic model of take, make and waste just doesn't cut it anymore. We need to move to a circular economy where materials are used again and again, a decarbonised economy that keeps a lid on global warming, a sustainable economy where businesses and communities prosper together in the years ahead. And we need to take huge leaps in that transition in just a decade. According to the International Governmental Panel on Climate Change, we need to reduce greenhouse emissions by 45% by 2030. And as you'll hear today, business in the community is setting tough targets on resource productivity for that year as well. The clock is ticking. I'm Thomas Moore, I'm the Science and Environment Correspondent at Sky News, and I've been heavily involved in Sky's agenda-setting ocean rescue campaign on single-use plastic for the last couple of years. Now, over the next couple of hours, we'll explore some of the challenges and hear from companies that are beginning to find solutions. In a moment, we'll kick off with a panel discussion that will underline the urgency of action. Then I'm delighted to say that we'll hear from both the Prince of Wales and the Secretary of State for the Environment. His Royal Highness will then leave, but the summit continues with another panel, a discussion on innovation. Now, it is chilly in here. I'm glad many of you kept your coats on. There are blankets on your chairs. Don't feel shy about them. We don't want any headlines about hypothermia. First, to make sense of this extraordinary setting, can I welcome to the stage Richard Kirkman, Chief Technology and Innovation Officer at Veolia. Richard, 200,000 tonnes of material. Where does it all go?
Well, you can think of this place as just a factory. Look at all that equipment up there. But we like to think of this as London's most technologically advanced and today populated urban mining operation. Because as you say, we collect 200,000 tonnes of material right from up at London Bridge, up at the Thames, right the way down through all those very densely populated areas down to Dulwich. It's a huge expanse of people living in different types of accommodation. They have different ways to recycle. They produce different materials. We bring that huge mess of stuff in here, has no value whatsoever at that point. And we separate it and we synthesize it and we refine it like a mining operation until it has some value.
So
it's waste to wealth.
How much value do you extract from our rubbish?
So material coming in may cost £100. When it's leaving, it may have the value of £100. We're turning it on its head. These bales of paper you can see around you have the value of £100 a tonne. The metals can be up to £1,000 a tonne. The plastics can be £300 or £400 a tonne. And what we're doing with those materials is we're trying to mainstream their replacement in industrial processes. And you'll hear a bit about that later. This is not a niche activity. We want industry to work with us to replace their feedstocks and use this instead. That's the mission.
Indeed, to support that secondary market. We heard from the Chancellor in the budget that there would be a tax on companies that aren't putting 30% recycled material in their packaging. Is that the kind of strategy that could really transform the recycling business here in the UK?
Yeah, that's a fundamental step. We can produce this material, but if no one wants to buy it and put it into new things, then it's not worthwhile doing. So if there's a pull from the market to do it, that helps us. If there's a tax on not doing it, that helps us. And there's a whole ream of things the government are doing which are very positive for recycling. The deposit return scheme, changing the packaging recovery regulations, putting taxes on not using recycled content. All those things together need to happen, not one thing in isolation.
And all these machines cost a lot of money, so you need a stable market to actually invest.
We're ready to invest. We've invested about 1.2 million so far. We've got about another billion to invest. That's happening. The tax announcement actually made us think, well, we've got another line down in Dagenham. Let's invest next year. The decisions are made when these things are announced. It actually is happening.
So the stuff you, just to re-emphasize the point, that the stuff you can't recycle to turn into new stuff, you actually burned and you extract the heat and the power.
Everything we bring into here, we try to recycle first because it has a higher value. And roughly out of the 200,000 tonnes, about half of it is recycled. The other half we send to a plant just down the road where we turn it into electricity and heat, and that heat is pumped back to the flats in this area where we collected the refuse and heats their baths and showers. Now, we need more of those materials to be made recyclable in the first place. We're at the limit of what we can recycle. So we need a whole change in the economy of how we make things in the first place. And that design change is also critical.
So you're heating the homes where the rubbish came from. That's quite a nice circular story, isn't it? Richard, thank you very much indeed. It sets up our discussion very nicely. So if I can introduce my first panel here. So we have, on my right, we've got Emma Howard-Boyd, Chair of the Environment Agency, Claes Gustafsson from Tekniska Verken, which is a Swedish network of incinerators where you extract power and heat. We have Peter Lacey, Senior Managing Director of Accenture Strategy, and also wrote a book on waste to wealth, so he clearly knows his stuff. And on the end there, Amanda McKenzie, of course, Chief Executive of Business in the Community. A quick question to each of you before we get into the meat of this. Emma, the Environment Agency almost sees the problem where waste has no value. You get waste crime, you get litter on our beaches coming through from the oceans and so on. How big a problem is it?
Well, happily, the majority of businesses are incredibly responsible, but there's no doubt at the edges we're seeing huge loss to the economy. Roughly 600 million a year is lost to the Treasury and to businesses because of waste crime. And it's something that we have a real opportunity right now to make sure that we're resetting the regulatory framework so that we can focus on the circular economy. So happily, as I've said, the vast bulk of business is behaving really well around waste, but we do need to make sure that we have strong powers and enforcement capabilities to deal with the waste crime element. We're shutting over 2 criminal waste sites a day at the moment.
Goodness me. Claes, and in Sweden, it's a different picture. Whenever I've been to Sweden, it's a very clean environment. Now, is that a cultural difference, or do you think you see waste as a resource, and therefore there is an incentive to...
Yeah, I think the most important thing is what you have in your head, what kind of perspective you have. So we don't look upon waste as garbage, we look upon waste as resources. And if you look upon it as garbage, then you have a problem to get rid of it. If you look upon it as a resource, then the next question is, how can I create as much value as possible out of this resource? And then you end up in completely different solutions.
And of course, you've got a deposit scheme on bottles as well,
Yes.
which of course builds in value to the plastic. So people bring it back, companies want to deal with it, people recycle it. And
Yes, exactly. So you need to put money into the system, and then companies like we can make business and find the business models and find the solutions.
Peter, we stole the title for this conference from you, Waste to Wealth. What's your perspective?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that this is a $4.5 trillion opportunity by 2030 for businesses to find the solutions, to find the answers for us as consumers, but for businesses to really become circular in the next 10 to 15 years. So this is a major global opportunity. But I think the way I would frame it is to say we need to rethink 3 things. The first is that we need to stop thinking about waste, exactly as the gentleman from Veolia mentioned, as a cost or a risk, and to frame it as an innovation opportunity. And so new products, new markets, new services, bringing value into the economy around waste that allows us to think differently. The second, I think, is that we need to be careful not to think of waste just as recovery and recycle, and expand that into wasted life cycles of products, into wasted embedded values at the end of life cycles that are left within products that aren't recovered or recycled, and indeed wasted capacity in different systems like mobility that we have around the world. So I think that's the second thing. Be very careful that we've put the right North Star out there so that businesses can actually see where their opportunities match those different forms of waste. And then the third and final thing is that the only real game in town for me over the next 10 years is the extraordinary set of opportunities around the fourth industrial revolution. New technologies, scientific breakthroughs in digital, physical, biological, that are enabling us to do things that we had never thought possible in terms of new business models, in terms of industrial equipment having sensors and big data and analytics, being able to track and trace the flow of materials through economies. And we need to arc the curve of the fourth industrial revolution to be absolutely behind circular economy.
Did you think businesses recognise the threat that is coming their way, the warnings from the IPCC, and what we need to do in a relatively short time span?
I certainly think some businesses do. I feel the enlightened ones do, and there's many of those business leaders in this room here.
But is it given enough priority? Because, of course, the last decade, times have been tough. Perhaps the environment is not really having the time it deserves on boards?
Well, interestingly, I think investors are getting much more thoughtful about this. So then they're driving that as well. So the minute people actually realise it's a virtuous circle and you will not create long-term value unless you tackle some of this stuff, then I think it will be. The enlightened ones got on board long ago. There's an awful lot of work going on. The question is the pace of it, which is why we set out if the government have suggested resource productivity doubling by 2050, what would it take for business to show the way and get there for 2030? That's what we've set out to try and...
Okay, you've set up the discussion very nicely there. Let's keep going with you, because you mentioned the industrial strategy by 2050 on resources and waste and so on. But business in the community wants to be tougher still. What's your rallying cry?
Well, I mean, everyone in this room, I'm hoping, is going to go away from today going, I can do more, I can be really thoughtful about my resource footprint as a business, and really get, frankly, bloody-minded about what you're going to tackle and the time in which you're going to do it. Be just the right side of unreasonable, because the reason we're in this extraordinary venue, it's like a gigantic seeing is believing visit. We are seeing is believing, and there's no point in believing it if we then don't act. So that's it, simple
but
as that.
To be clear, the targets you're setting, you want resource productivity to double by 2030.
And that's pretty brave, because some companies wouldn't necessarily know what their resource productivity is today. And yet our champions have nobly said, we're up for that, and we're also up for leading our sectors, pulling them together. But then the other piece is you can't just have the sectors, you've also got to have the regions involved. What could happen at a regional level to pull this together, and similarly linked with the local authority, because the other thing that needs to happen is consistency as well.
Peter, you do a lot of work at Davos with the Circulars, Accentures awards for people, for companies doing the right thing. Is there a common theme to what they do, or are different businesses coming up with different solutions to the challenge?
I think the answer is both. I think we looked at this, actually, we're in the process of actually unpacking 5 years of award winners. So we have 900 finalists over that 5 years to try and understand what is it that they are doing to be able to create some form of economic value or competitive advantage while delivering meaningful circular economy impact. I would say the two things that come out again and again across those case studies, one, it is about these enabling technologies that are helping them to do something differently, right? So that's one part of it. There's normally a scientific breakthrough. So we were talking a second ago about municipal waste streams. Last year's entrepreneurial winner was ARM, which is a robotics technology that has a recognition which helps you to, with big data and analytics, to sort waste streams more effectively, more efficiently, and can be retrofitted on different municipality systems around the world. Great example. So one, it's about the new sets of technologies. The other is it's about disruptive business models. And so the 5 that we saw again and again were things like circular supplies and material sciences, recovery and recycling models like this, sharing economy. You can see the gentleman at the front here sharing their
blankets,
their blanket, and I think getting extra warmth out of it. So making sure resource productivity in action at the front. Longevity of products and services, and then the shift from products to services. In all of those ways, we're finding companies who are able to decouple the value to a customer or a consumer from the use of scarce or harmful natural resources. And that's the innovation concept, I think.
And you were telling me an interesting story about Caterpillar, how when they had thought about extended life, they actually found a new market.
Well, the story here is, so I have a 5 and a 7-year-old son, and actually Daddy's work and book are very dull, except for when you describe Caterpillar, trucks and equipment and big mining or Lego. That's about the only two times I can get them involved. But when you think about Caterpillar and the equipment, actually fundamentally it's built of 6,000 pieces that get reconfigured in lots of different products and services. Caterpillar actually set up a division that is totally dedicated to taking back equipment, refurbishing it, remarketing it, reselling it. It's got now $1 billion worth of revenue, 4,000 jobs that have been created along those lines. But from a circularity perspective, for each recovered, recycled, refurbished, remarketed piece of equipment, it's 90% more energy efficient and 80% more resource efficient. They've also been able to use it from a competitive perspective because they've been able to price more competitively with some of the emerging market developing brands that are coming in cheaper. So it's just a good example of where we're thinking about how to create real value and real circularity, decoupling that customer proposition from scarce or harmful natural resources.
Thank you, Klaas. I mean, we heard earlier about how the stuff that can't be recycled here goes to an incineration, and the community actually benefits from the heat and the power that's derived from that. But Sweden goes much further here. Just talk about what your experience is. Very little goes to landfill.
Yeah, I mean, we treat about 1 million tons of waste every year. And we produce electricity, we produce heating, we produce cooling, and we produce biogas. Biogas from the organic waste. So for instance, all buses in Linköping and the nearby city in Norrköping is propelled on biogas. Every bus. And then of course electricity and heat. And 200,000 tons come from UK to Linköping. And in Sweden, the total of waste coming from UK to Sweden is 600,000 tons per year.
You were saying that waste is actually Britain's biggest export to Sweden.
Yeah, when it comes to weight, it's the biggest export product. The second biggest is Scotch whiskey. Also, I mean, the transportation, this is transported in containers that transport should have been done anyway, because UK buy a lot of forest products from Sweden, but there are too little export from Great Britain back to Sweden. So the forest industry need to transport empty containers back to Sweden, and then we use the room in the empty containers and put this kind of
which of course reduces the carbon impact of the transport, which is fantastic. But can I challenge you on this? Clearly you are deriving wealth from the waste as much as you can, but the EU has set tough targets for increasing the amount of recycling. When you have hungry incinerators and a market-driven network of incinerators, is there not a danger that by having incinerators there that need constant supply of waste, that people aren't going to invest in better recycling machines?
No. I mean, that's a simple answer. No. We have 140 million tons of waste within the European Union that ends up on landfill. That is the problem. The problem isn't that we have incineration capacity. The problem is that 140 million tons of waste ends up on landfill every year. Of course, all of that shouldn't be burned and being energy recovered. The most of it should be material recycled. However, a part of it should be energy recovered.
So a last resort, but making sure it doesn't go to landfill. Emma, would you agree?
Absolutely, and I think we have a huge opportunity given all of the public interest that has been driven over the last couple of years, thanks to things like your campaign, other campaigns. It's about 2 years since we at the Environment Agency called out waste crime as the new narcotics. All of this, together with China banning the import of plastic waste, gives us a real opportunity, working together, public sector, the private sector, the third sector, on behalf of consumers up and down this country to redesign the framework so that we're designing out waste and making sure that we have every opportunity to not have waste in the first place, but recycle it. And we're beginning to get those hints of what will come in the Waste and Resources Strategy, which is going to be shortly published. It's the sorts of things that we're going to look at.
How much are you hanging on to that? I mean, how important is the Resources and Waste Strategy in changing the landscape for the years to come?
It will be significant, but everybody in this room has a role to play in delivering that change. So it's been fantastic the way business has just got on and started making a difference. So what we heard earlier from Richard and the investment on the back of the potential of introducing a tax is the sort of thing that sends the right signals that we're going to tackle this.
Because if you have extended producer responsibilities, if you build in financial incentives to do the right thing, then from the moment of design, things are being
absolutely
thought, that the end of life of the product is being thought of.
We all need to understand as consumers right the way through the chain our responsibility for the waste that we are creating and design it out and then reuse it and make sure that the whole framework for the circular economy becomes the way we operate in this country.
Amanda, a lot of businesses are doing the right thing. Sometimes the right thing costs money. Do you think by having a good resources and waste strategy, you will level up the playing field, make it fair for everybody, push people in the right direction?
It's interesting. I suppose it links back to the point I said about investors, and they are increasingly thoughtful on this subject. But I think if you take a view that your long-term value will not be maximised unless you do this, actually you could argue the level playing field's an academic thing, because actually the issue is solve this anyway, because you're not going to have a future business if you don't.
Emma, you were an investor. You worked for Jupiter Asset Management in your past. Do you think there has been a change from the investment community on this?
Absolutely, and I'm still involved in the investment community through the Environment Agency Pension Fund, where we are embedding climate risk and things like how businesses are dealing with waste as part of the way we're investing. So working with our fund managers on behalf of the beneficiaries to make sure that their pension fund is going to be fit for purpose in the future.
Pensions might be a case apart, where they do think long term, of course, but is there a problem with hedge funds who are trying to extract a quick buck from some companies, that the boards are under pressure to think about the short-term rather than long-term solutions that this is going to need?
I think there's a growing move towards long-term investment, and that is certainly where I'm, with others, focusing my attention.
Actually, sorry, if I might
yes.
jump in. Also, if you think about the consumer in this, that's what they want. So it's enlightened self-interest anyway. Never mind the investor. If you're a business, you're satisfying consumer need. We know from the research that we did, they are wanting us, the business community, to make this an easy thing to do, that people react. So actually, that's shareholders, consumers. It's pretty tangible. We've just got to get on and do it.
Klaus?
I totally agree that the demand is there, and what we have to do is make it simple. It must be simple to do the right things. People want to do right, and we have the responsibility to make sure that we make it simple to do the right thing.
Would you agree, Peter, with the work that you're doing with Accenture?
I think so. I agree with the point about long-term investing, moving towards that, and I think some of the points you make. I still think there are plenty of reasons why the system pushes us towards behaviours that are suboptimal in the investor space, and so I think one of the interviews that we did before we wrote the book actually was with a friend of mine who has no interest whatsoever in sustainability in the banking and finance community. So sort of about as cutthroat capitalism as you could have in order to kind of look at this. And he said, well, look, unless you get this within the green bays of the Excel spreadsheets that analysts and investors use, you're going to always struggle with the mainstream. So when we did that, we decided to actually make sure that it did stack up within the green bays of Excel, and that actually, at least for the stuff that we've been looking at, you don't need that $4.5 trillion opportunity I mentioned. That isn't dependent on regulation. That isn't dependent on policy. It's massively accelerated by that, and it's a very important enabler enabling context, and so if we can push that, it'll move faster and at more scale. But actually, many of the opportunities out there for companies that are opportunities, not risk, not cost, opportunities, are here and now. And so I think there is an enormous opportunity for people to get started with this stuff by looking at those new disruptive business models and technologies, not waiting around. Perhaps this group is not the right one to sort of point fingers at from that perspective. Many of you are very progressive, but actually too many companies, when I talk to them, say, well, look, I'll wait until the regulatory framework and the pricing signals are clear. No, there are opportunities here and now.
Can I ask all of you, I mean, clearly people in the room here get it. They see the threat, they realize they need to respond. There are a lot of other people who are not here. How do you get them engaged?
I think partly that is happening. I mean, I think I'm always interested in these perfect storms that emerge around public consciousness around issues. You know, you go back to 2006, 2007, and you look at the juxtaposition of all the work that was being done by Nick Stern with the IPCC report, with the Al Gore stuff. It was suddenly, and then the European Union targets, climate change and carbon became a massive thing across public consciousness around the world, and I thought there was a tipping point. I think some of the work that you've done with Sky and others have been doing on plastics, the like of Ellen MacArthur, it feels like plastics, for example, now, where even 18 months, 2 years ago, people weren't talking seriously in the same way as they are now. It's now becoming a public consciousness thing, and I think it's becoming really antisocial, actually, to actually see plastic waste in our houses around us. And it just feels like there are those little tipping points that are happening. And I think clearly with circular plastics is not the only area, but it's a really useful ratchet upwards, I think, in terms of people's behaviours. And
it's a way of engaging people, isn't it, in the issue?
It is.
So leadership is absolutely key, and we can lead in, again, across the entire spectrum of private, public and third sector. There's a reputational risk around this, and there's also the competition. It's a race, and we all need to win it. So getting that combination right, that combination of both the regulatory framework, the fiscal incentives, to make sure that opportunity to invest really is delivered upon.
Amanda, yeah.
I just want to thank, actually, the sector champions, because I hope they know what they've committed themselves for.
Do you want to explain what the Waste to Wealth champions are? Who are they?
So with DEFRA, we worked out the sectors that have the most opportunity. And those sectors and those sector champions have very nobly said, fine, on behalf of the sector, we're willing to pull this sector together, to look at it holistically and actually champion and share best practice, share vulnerabilities, share things that have failed. And so together, which is, I think, what BITC over the years is absolutely its sweet spot, is bringing those sectors together. So thank you to the sector champions for what you're going to do. I think as well, we've got a lot of people who have committed, and that's, well over 50 companies. There's a lovely page in the Times saying, you've committed to this. So again, they can bring along with them, their supply chains. So everyone has so much more leverage than they ever think they have. And not least, as we've said, we've got consumers, we've got stakeholders, you've got your supply chains, we've got our sector champions. Frankly, and a brilliant amount of intelligence in the room, there's nothing we can't achieve.
Amanda, that is great. I think we really need to re-emphasise the leadership role here for the BITC, that there is help there for companies that are going to have to make this sometimes quite difficult transition over the years to come, but that there is a sense of leadership here, that there is a helping hand to steer in the right direction.
Most definitely.
Yeah. And just briefly, those 5 champions, just name them.
There's going to be a slide. Hopefully, there might be a slide.
Maybe,
There'll be a slide later. Hold the line.
Maybe later.
I will look up my list. I'm so sorry.
We are expecting to be interrupted in a moment. I'm just nervously watching for the door at the back. On their way. 2 minutes.
And huge thanks to you for doing this, because I know it's going to be tough old yards, but it's brilliant. Thank you.
Go on. And I think I'm going to have to interrupt you. I think that really shows that there are global solutions here. It's a global problem. There will be a global solution too. But I'm sorry to interrupt you, and can I ask all of you to not stand for the photographers. That's not who I was expecting. But no, I think he's been delayed by people outside. I think this is quite an unusual facility, so there's lots of people to meet and lots of people to look. Health and safety briefing. Yeah, perhaps high-vis jackets for us all, the most appropriate. But we are about to be joined by the royal party any moment. So if I can get you all to stand and welcome His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales and the Secretary of State for the Environment, the Right Honourable Michael Gove. To this very unusual setting here, Veolia in Southwark, where so much is done to take wealth from waste. Gavin, would you like to come and say a few words?
Your Royal Highnesses, Secretary of State, thank you on behalf of Veolia and Southwark Council for coming here to our integrated recycling facility. This is a live plant that was working till 10 o'clock last night, processing recyclates from Southwark and London boroughs, and will again be operating this afternoon. So it does show waste to wealth works on an industrial scale. But it has been a journey. It's been a number of years. 5 years ago, we were fortunate to win the Queen's Award for Sustainable Development. 3 years ago, we were BITC's Responsible Business of the Year. But today, it's all about sustainability goes mainstream. And let me talk to you about that and show some examples. On the right, Tony the Tiger, made out of plastics recycling. Under it are bales that came out of this plant last night, bales of plastic. We take that to our facility in Dagenham and convert the old plastic into food-grade HDPE. Enough plastic bottles out of London, all the milk bottles, back into food grade. It actually works, sustainable, and we're doing it today. On my left, we have our glass. It doesn't quite come as clean as that to us, but we take the glass and a joint venture with Canal, we process it, clean it into cullet, and make it into sustainable, energy-efficient insulation. And lastly, at the back left, compost. Green waste from the food clippings we process and make into peat-free compost every day. So it shows how we are able to make products from waste, convert waste to wealth. And what we can't recycle, and every day we're looking for new products, new innovation, we take to our combined heat and power plant 1 mile away from here, which we're very fortunate, sir, you opened 24 years ago. And that use the black bags into electricity, but also now, with partnership with Southwark Council, we put a district heating system in, and we heat 3,000 homes in Southwark with it. Hopefully we're going to expand that to 6,000 homes. So everything that's given to us, we try and use to the maximum value. And that is why partnership with industry, partnership with local authorities is important to us, because going forward, we have to make waste to wealth work. Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin. It really is a splendid tiger. There's quite a few people who'd like to take that one home. Your Royal Highnesses, Secretary of State, may I add my welcome to what is a perfect setting for this discussion on waste to wealth. And allow me to summarise the panel discussion that we have just been having with business leaders. We've heard how business in the community is setting the challenge today of doubling resource productivity and eliminating avoidable waste by 2030. We've heard also how some companies are taking steps towards a more circular economy. And we've heard experience from Sweden, where waste is widely seen as a resource, with 99% of it either recycled or used to generate heat and power for homes. That's how businesses are increasingly stepping up to the mark, but consumers are finding their voice too, amplified through our own ocean rescue campaign at Sky, but also from the excellent programs made by my next guest. He's already waged a war on waste. Please welcome Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall.
Thank you.
Hugh, I mean, what's your perspective from a consumer's standpoint on what's going on now?
Your Royal Highness, Secretary of State, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me here today. My perspective is that the problem is a big one. Historically, if you go back to the 1950s, well, I've been looking at the problem of waste for about 4 years. I started with food waste. I got onto a very knotty issue on non-recyclable paper coffee cups. And now I should say I'm standing in the line of fire on single-use plastics, which is perhaps the most alarming issue of all. Looking at plastics production since the 1950s, we've produced 8.3 billion tons of plastics in the industrial history of the product. So far, we've succeeded in repurposing only 5% of that. And yet, of course, plastics production, as we know, is increasing all the time. We're now at 350 million tons a year. That's set to double by 2035 and quadruple by 2050, a date that keeps coming up when we look at projections. Given some of the issues that are facing us, if you think of that 95% of unrepurposed plastic in the history of the product, we know that far too much of that has ended up in the environment, in the sea, in landfill. If we're going to see a quadrupling of the product over the next 35 years, how is that actually going to affect us, and what are we actually going to do about it?
But the consumers, as I said, consumers are really rising up. This is an issue which is really important to them.
They are, and only today there was a poll published that says that 83% of consumers want more help with recycling, they want better direction, but they say that they are committed, and 75% of us are already taking action to do something about it.
So how can businesses help consumers then, do you think?
Well, I think one of the problems we have is that people, willing as they are to engage, they are confused. We've got over 400 over 400 councils in the UK, and between them, they have 39 different sets of rules on how recycling is undertaken. So it's not surprising that we have some confusion there. And I think we definitely need to see some national streamlining of recycling techniques and recycling objectives, so that everyone can feel they're part of the same thing. In the end, people want to know, it means so much to people to know that their recycling efforts really are rewarded, that they are part of something big and important, and that the outcomes that they hope for are the outcomes that are achieved. And at the moment, there's still some uncertainty about those outcomes.
We're standing here in the facility where all this material is going to go to a good home, but I know for the series that you've got coming up, you actually tracked plastic where it all goes wrong. It goes abroad. And
yeah, I mean, I have been to what you could say that is the worst case scenario, and it would be nice to say that it looks like a diminishing problem. I would certainly say we need to make it a diminishing problem. Only a few weeks ago, I was in Malaysia on illegal dump sites, sometimes the size of 2 or 3 football pitches, with plastic waste piled in bales at least as high as that, probably twice as high as that. And I was distraught to discover significant amounts of plastic waste from the UK. Unmistakable brands you'd all recognized, pound signs on the price tags. I even found waste bags from councils from around the UK. Now, there are complicated reasons why that's happening, but we absolutely know that that is not a desirable outcome. And it's certainly not that the outcome that people are hoping for, when they feel that they're doing the right thing and putting their plastic recycling where they're told to put it.
And that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about trying to build this secondary market here so we don't ship plastic abroad. Hugh, thank you very much indeed.
Can I just say that I'm delighted to see the Secretary of State here today. We felt we almost lost him last week to Brexit, but I'm very much hoping that one of the reasons he's still with us today is perhaps with a sense of unfinished business on this massive issue of waste, and with the intentions of taking bold action. We've already heard some fantastic rhetoric on the subject of waste, and I'm really hoping for some bold action that properly kickstarts this hugely important idea that we've all discussed here today of a truly circular economy. And the deadline of 2050 that some of us have heard rumoured, remembered, that is the deadline by which plastics could have quadrupled. It's also the deadline by which there could be more plastics in our oceans than there are fish if we don't take radical action now.
Hugh, thank you very much indeed. Sit down here. You sit down here. Amanda, just very briefly, before I bring in the Secretary of State, Amanda, do you want to respond on behalf of business to what Hugh said then?
Well, I mean, I think we'd all wholeheartedly agree, and I think the point that you say at the end, bold action, is absolutely it. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because China banned plastic bags back in 2008. You know, and there we, you know, so you go, there's something there we should learn and really get after. I think we've, you know, all voices make a difference to this, campaigning, getting after this. And I think we've heard that we need to make it easy for consumers, absolutely, and reward them. And then the consistency point needs to come out. And we've, you know, in each sector and each region, we've just got to drive that consistency home.
Amanda, thank you very much indeed. Now, the environment hasn't always been high on the political agenda, but it's become a defining strand of the current government's domestic policy. A 25-year environment plan, a commitment to tackle the scourge of single-use plastic, and any day now, we hope, what promises to be a game-changing resources and waste strategy. Please welcome our next speaker, Secretary of State for the Environment, Michael Gove.
Thank you very much, Hugh. Thank you for your kind welcome. It is true that last week I was on the point potentially of being discarded, but nevertheless, I hope there is still some life and use in me yet. And I also wanted to thank all of you for doing so much today to make me feel at home. Because of course, as someone who spends so much of their life in the House of Commons, I'm used to being in an echoing chamber, filled with people talking rubbish, and surrounded by paper, the purpose of which many, many people will question. But it's a particular pleasure to be here today because it gives me an opportunity to say thank you to people in this room for the leadership that they have shown. One of my favorite books is The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway. In it, two characters, Bill and Mike, are discussing their economic fortunes. And Bill asks Mike, who's just gone bankrupt, how did it happen? How did you go bankrupt? And Mike replies, well, in two ways. Gradually, then suddenly. Gradually, then suddenly. That process describes not just what happens when individuals and countries face debt and then crisis. It also describes how change happens in our world and in our politics. Gradually, then suddenly. For all the time that mankind has been on this earth, we've been having a gradual impact on our surroundings. We're the most voracious, rapacious, and also the most inventive of species. And our impact over time was gradual. In our desire for shelter, for food, for warmth, we harvested the resources of this planet, the only home that we have. And over time, forests were cut down. Land was put under cultivation. The resources of this earth were utilized without much thought to the morrow. But in recent years, as Hugh and others have reminded us, this gradual impact of man on the earth The weight of our footprint has suddenly become much heavier and much more destructive. The way in which we've moved from using timber to the hydrocarbons under our soil to fuel our economy and to warm our planet at the same time have brought us to a point, as His Royal Highness was among the first to point out, where we could be reaching a point of no return in the balance of this earth, undermining the potential of all of us to hand it on in a fit state to future generations. And it's not just climate change. It's also the case that if we think about the richness of nature, gradually over time, we've seen extinctions. But suddenly, in the course of my adult lifetime, this process has accelerated. We're seeing iconic species, like the African elephant, which has reduced over the course of the last 100 years by 90%. In our own country, we've seen wildflower meadows, critical for pollinators and indeed for the health of our whole environment, reduced in the last 100 years by 97%. In the last 40 years, the number of farmland birds, and that's taken as the best index of biodiversity, has reduced by 70%. In the last 40 years, the number of mammals, amphibians, reptiles, and birds on this planet has reduced by 60%. Suddenly, we're on the verge of an environmental crisis. And of course, critical to dealing with that is thinking hard about how we can move from our old model of a linear economy, exploitative, extractive, and wasteful, towards a circular economy, one which ensures that we respect the limits of this planet, that we use resources more wisely, and we recognize that because this is our home, because there is no planet B, that change has to come. And change has come, gradually, and then suddenly. There have been some pioneers, some figures, who have spoken out about the vital importance of recognizing the limits of this earth, but also the vital importance of harnessing human creativity to deal with the challenges that we face. And one of the most resonant, persuasive, and powerful voices has been His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales. And arguments that he's been making about our countryside, about waste, and about climate change, which were not necessarily regarded as mainstream, are now, everyone acknowledges, prescient warnings that everyone has to take heed of. And that gradual change has been driven by leaders in this room, by people like Hugh, by people like Emma Howard-Boyd, by people like Jerry and others, who have all been making a contribution to making sure that human ingenuity and the creativity and innovation of a market economy can make a difference. And I've seen it with my own eyes, thanks to Business in the Community, the wonderful organization that the Prince set up in order to ensure that business upon whom we rely can also exercise a force for good, not just in creating jobs and profits and taxes, but also in changing behavior and changing our world. And when I had the privilege of visiting with His Royal Highness James Cropper, the paper mill in Cumbria, I saw how enlightened business leadership can take resources which would otherwise casually have been discarded and make something worthwhile and new, innovative and profitable from it. And there are people gathered here who are showing that what started out perhaps as a niche area for business has now become mainstream. So in everything from the way in which companies like Veolia are doing so much to ensure that we can take waste material, recycle and reuse it, to the innovation that's been shown in every area, from the redeployment of plastics to the reuse of food waste. There is an opportunity there for this country to lead economically and environmentally. But there is an obligation on government to provide the platform on which you can lead. And that is why later this year we will be publishing a waste and resources strategy. The Chancellor has already said that we are going to use the tax system in order to ensure that virgin plastics and other materials can be taxed, we hope, in a way which will lead to a far wiser use of the Earth's resources. And the money those taxes raise will go to the front line, It will go to the local authorities who will be responsible for playing their part in making sure that we can recycle more effectively. And that money will be used exactly as Hugh asks us, to ensure that there are minimum standards, greater uniformity, and that we can meet the ambitions that everyone in this room rightly has. Gradually, over time, the scale of the crisis has become clear. Suddenly, and in this room, all of us are seized with the vital urgency of having to act. And for that reason, can I thank you, and can I also thank, as I said earlier, the one person whose voice has been clearest, most consistent, and bravest in making the case for action, His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary of State. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce the President and the founding patron of business in the community, His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales.
Your Royal Highness, Secretary of State, ladies and gentlemen, I really could not be more pleased to see so many of you here today, frozen stiff at the back by the looks of it, to talk about turning waste into wealth. This is a subject that needs to be close to all our hearts if we are to achieve the future we want for our families, our businesses, our society, and, of course, our one and only planet. And I must say I'm enormously grateful to the Secretary of State for his very kind words earlier, and indeed for coming along here at all in the midst of his busy schedule. Now, if I may say so, I thought that WWF UK, which I am a very proud president, summed things up rather well recently when it reported that we are the first generation to know that we are destroying the world, and the last that can do anything about it. We are using resources faster than nature can replenish them and damaging our own life support systems. But before I say any more on that subject, I also want to thank Veolia Environmental Services for its considerable generosity in hosting this major event, especially its Chief Executive, Gavin Gravison, and all our speakers, but particularly Claes Gustafsson, Vice President of Technische Werken, for joining us from Sweden, and of course Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall for taking time out of his very busy activities to be here as well. And of course none of this would have happened without the efforts of Jeremy Darrach and Amanda Mackenzie and all their marvellous team at Business in the Community. Now, I do not have any statistics to prove this point, but I rather think we have seen something of a sea change, if you'll forgive the awful pun, in public attitudes since the BBC's Blue Planet series was shown. Those extraordinary images backed up by Sir David Attenborough's compelling commentary seem to have tapped into a deep unease amongst a great many people about the way we are treating our planetary home. The concept of ever greater convenience, with much of our waste allowed to accumulate indefinitely, has of course led to the throwaway society. However, seeing so vividly the consequences of the way we have been using plastics in particular has clearly opened many eyes that were previously either closed or looking determinedly in other directions. Every discarded plastic drinking straw, wet wipe, cup, bottle or bag tells a clear and unequivocal story of waste and missed opportunity, both to generate value and to address the overarching challenge of climate change, recently listed, of course, by the World Economic Forum as amongst the biggest threats facing the world. We've been talking about energy efficiency for more than 40 years now. In fact, since the oil crises of the 1970s. And, of course, using energy much more efficiently is an essential step in limiting climate change. But it really is only part of the solution. It is equally important that we plan and deliver resource efficiency, or if you prefer, materials efficiency. The numbers are pretty alarming. Global steel production grew by 40% in the last decade. Cement production tripled over the same period, and demand for plastics is doubling about every 20 years, as we've heard. These materials are important for developing economies, so it should be no surprise that this growth seems set to continue. All of that production requires energy, which is why industry accounts for around 40% of greenhouse gas emissions. Yet much of the required material already exists in our society, and utilizing it in circular approaches requires much less energy. 75% of steel can be recycled, as can around 50% of aluminium and plastics. So it is clear that recycling is part of the answer. We have become very good at making things. Now we have to get much better at unmaking and remaking them. And to assist that process, we have to find ways of giving what we unhelpfully refer to as waste a proper value. We have to monetize it. Well, this is a topic which has interested me for a large part of my 70 years and 10. And more than 40 years ago, for instance, on a visit to the United States, I saw a landfill site in California that had been capped and was generating methane. On my return to the United Kingdom, I tried to draw this scheme to the attention of local authorities in Wales. In 1991, I invited a group of business and council leaders to visit Berlin to see a range of advanced techniques being used for recycling municipal waste. In the same year, and much closer to home, indeed at home, I installed a reed bed sewage treatment system at Highgrove. And all the waste from the 40,000 people who visit the place every year passes through a bark filtration system and then a reed bed and a willow bed, leaving only clean water to drain away. The bark is composted and used on the garden and farm, while the willow grows 6 feet a year and is cut to weave into baskets which we sell in the shop. At the time, this was considered extremely eccentric. Many forward-thinking businesses are, I know, already putting the principles of the circular economy into practice. Earlier this year, I saw novel methods of recycling paper cups, which of course include plastic in them, at James Cropper in Kendal, assisted by collaboration with industry and local authorities. In the chemical sector, innovative de-inking processes are allowing 100% reuse of recovered pulp by Camira, and up to 90% of phosphorescent chemicals are being recycled from waste fluorescent lamps by Solvay. Yet, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very long way to go. For instance, 13 billion pounds worth of edible food and 140 million pounds worth of clothing goes to landfill every year. More than half the plastic bottles sold in the United Kingdom every year are now recycled. But that still leaves 5.5 billion plastic bottles that are being littered, incinerated, or landfilled. And that is 15 million per day, which, of course, is why a deposit scheme on plastic bottles and the introduction of reverse vending machines might be quite helpful. In the last 5 years, 12.5 million computers have ended up in British landfill sites. Worldwide, almost 150 million tons of clothing and shoes are sold every year. The majority ends up in landfills or incinerators, yet the infrastructure to collect, reuse and recycle these garments already exists, as does the technology to recycle old clothes into cotton pulp. We also need to be clear that resource efficiency is not all about materials recovery and recycling. Better processes that reduce inefficiency also have an important part to play. So, for instance, half of the aluminium produced every year ends up as processed scrap and does not reach the final product. And around 15% of building materials are wasted in construction. Greater resource efficiency brings other benefits too, as I'm sure you all know, such as reduced geopolitical risks, local job creation, lower air pollution, and reduced water use, thereby contributing to several of the Sustainable Development Goals. I really am particularly pleased, ladies and gentlemen, that Klaus Gustafsson, who has already spoken, was able to tell us something about his experience of always looking for solutions that will optimize the use of resources while being considerate of the environment and climate. Sweden has long been a pioneer of making producers responsible for ensuring that items they place on the market, such as electrical goods, are collected and recycled in a sustainable way. This approach applies in the community too. From a very young age, Swedish children are taught to recycle both at home and at school. There is even a national day on which children across the country gather to pick up litter and clean up their surroundings. And incidentally, I'd forgotten that I'd taken my children litter picking all those years ago, nor had I realized they'd paid any attention at all. And of course, there are admirable initiatives in this country too. I would encourage anyone wanting to know more about the opportunities to look at the recent publications from the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, the London Waste and Recycling Board, and the Waste and Resources Action Programme. They all take slightly different approaches, but all are highly commendable, providing not just food for thought, but recipes for action. However, ladies and gentlemen, as things stand, the sums do not add up. If we are to have any chance of limiting climate change to well below 2 degrees, as set out in the Paris Agreement and as highlighted by the IPCC's recent report, we are going to have to use much less of the Earth's resources and use them more efficiently too. This is going to require changes at both speed and scale. And in my experience, the only way to achieve that is to mobilize the skills and ingenuity of the business community, where necessary, backed up by regulation. That, after all, is why business in the community is such an effective organization, and why we are all here today, as it boldly says in the Commitment Declaration, to double resource productivity and eliminate all avoidable waste by 2030. The small steps we have taken towards a circular economy will need to become giant strides if we are to achieve the required changes before time runs out. But this is not all about risk. As some of the pioneers have shown, there are opportunities too, which is why today's event is entitled Waste to Wealth. Finding solutions to the challenges of using resources more effectively can deliver lower cost, higher value ways of working, beneficial to businesses, to the communities they operate in, and to the environment. In essence, therefore, one man's or business's waste can be another's raw material. But to what extent do we join up the dots effectively? So it seems to me that there is likely to be a substantial advantage to those who move quickly and decisively in the right direction, in collaboration with all elements of their supply chains, from product engineers, from product designers, producers, and retailers, through to local authorities and waste management companies, reprocessors, and customers. One of the challenges is how best to put sellers in touch with buyers. How does one company know what another might be able to offer? A centralized location would be one solution, but it doesn't make sense to move materials further than is necessary. So I was intrigued to hear about the innovative approach being developed in the Netherlands by a company called Excess Materials Exchange. And they have developed a digital marketplace where companies can exchange materials and products, and which seeks to identify the highest value uses. This is still at the pilot stage, but does look promising as an example of a new approach that might help unlock the full potential of a circular economy. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is certainly encouraging that so many companies have already signed today's declaration, and I particularly want to commend the Waste to Wealth champions for being the first to step up. They are Nestle UK and Ireland, Burger King, JLL, Interface, European Metal Recycling, Sodexo and Sainsbury's. I can only congratulate them all on having the foresight to make this commitment. And I know they will be working very hard with business in the community, the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership and the other Waste to Wealth partners to devise practical steps to achieve their goals. And of course, we must all hope that a great many more companies will want to follow them as the word spreads. So if I can just leave you with a final thought, it is that WWF UK is absolutely right. We are the first generation to understand in full and terrifying scientific detail that we are testing our world to destruction. And we are the last to be able to do something about it. If we do not act, our children and grandchildren will not be able to sort out the mess. That's the problem. So, with a new grandchild on the way, and some of you may possibly be in the same situation, I do not want to miss that opportunity. And I'm sure you do not either, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, as our founding patron, His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, celebrates his 70th birthday, I think it's clear that he's lost none of his passion and urgency for positive change that saw him establish business in the community now 36 years ago. And I think for this, we should all be extremely grateful. It's this drive for improvement that's inspired many of the people I know today in the organisations to be with us. And it's why they join in and take action. Now, in a recent interview to celebrate his birthday, His Royal Highness pulled no punches when he urges all to stop buggering around with the planet. I couldn't have put it better myself. Now, hearing that reinforced my own belief of the significant opportunity we all carry. We simply cannot look the other way. The urgency, as you heard, is ever more pressing, which is why we all must do more about the detrimental impact we're having on the world in which we live. And I think this is especially true for us as business leaders. You know, we carry a great responsibility, but we also have a great opportunity to have a real effect. My question is, are we all doing enough? If we, as those responsible for setting the direction of business, were presented, I think, with a similar concerning outlook on the state of our markets, the competency of our core products, or the future of our customer base, I'm pretty sure we'd use all of the power and influence that we have to change tack, to rethink, to pivot perhaps, in order to secure our future. And that's because successful businesses are really expert at responding to changes in customer preference, to changes in technology, and to changes in demand. We should never underestimate the privileged position that we are all in. Every decision that we take has an impact. It impacts people's lives, it impacts our employees, it impacts our immediate communities, And of course, it impacts the wider world that we leave to future generations. And that's why the power of business, the collective power of the people in this room and, of course, well beyond, is a resource that we can and we should harness. It's, of course, why we're all here today. Now, BITC's strength, I think, acts in its role as a convener. But, of course, it's up to all of us to work together to find the solutions that are bigger than ourselves and our individual companies and sectors, to break down the traditional competitive barriers, indeed ignore those, and find ways to collaborate to unlock ideas. If we take the innovation zone that's here today, I think it's a great example of people working together to find sustainable solutions that will help build a more circular economy. But we also need to set ourselves demanding targets and to use the same winning mindset that propels business forward to change the relationship that we have with our planet. And it means having uncomfortable conversations. It means applying pressure. It means holding people to account. And it means being open to scrutiny and challenge from customers and campaigners to question what we do. Now, I'd like to, if I could, just to bring that to life with my own experience at my company, Sky. In October last year, we set ourselves the target of being single-use plastic-free by 2020. Of course, that meant taking single-use plastic out of all of our products, our packaging, and our supply chain. So from set-top boxes to mobile phones, through to the packaging we use on every new product that we ship. We even had to address the way we remove makeup from the faces of our on-air talent. From big to small, it makes a difference. And that's why at the end of the year, for all of our branded products, our operations, our front of house, we'll already be 100% single-use plastic-free. We're 75% of the way there already on logistics and supply chain. Of course, it hasn't always been easy, but the team that we have now, of course, look back with enormous pride in what's been achieved. And their achievements to date have been possible because we really embraced the challenge and we made it non-negotiable. And once we had a target to shoot for, we were able to create really fundamental change in our own business. Through a change of mindset, I think we've now removed some 7 million disposable coffee cups that we were using every year. We've taken 24 tons of plastic milk bottles out of our offices. We've lost 20 tons of disposable cutlery. They've gone. And by the end of the year, some 120 tons of plastic will have been saved. And that's just for a business like Sky that isn't a particularly big consumer. Of course, I still wonder if we can do more. And I'd encourage all of the businesses here to challenge themselves and do the same. By pledging to support us achieve the waste to wealth commitment, we can double the UK's resource productivity by 2030. Now that would be a full 20 years ahead of the government's target. Wouldn't that be a great thing to achieve? The clock, as you've heard, is ticking. As the UN said earlier this month, we only have 12 years to get climate change under control, and that's why we need to be ambitious, and that's why we need to be decisive. If we step up and take on the challenge, I think the impact can be significant, it will be noticeable, I think it'll inspire others, and it'll benefit all of us. So what are you going to do? What commitment can you make, and what commitment will you make right now? Let's all share the same passion and urgency for change as our patron and see what we can achieve together. Thank you very much. Now, if I could, a little aside, I'd now like to take a moment again just to mention the 70th birthday of our patron, His Royal Highness. It would be remiss of us not to recognise this occasion as part of your recent celebrations and, of course, to acknowledge your leadership, vision and the unique ability that you've brought to our agenda and the help that you've given us. So on behalf of all of us here, all the wider community of responsible business and the network, the thousands of business leaders who you have inspired and influenced through this programme, and the programme Seeing is Believing, may I thank you and wish you, of course, a very, very happy birthday. little bit late, but that's okay. Anyway, we've commissioned a short film, which we'd like to show everybody today. So if we could run the VT, as they say.
The big issues that we now still have in the boardroom, and probably argue even more so, he set the agenda. That's what he did 30 years ago, set the agenda for business.
He understood that business has a phenomenal capability in its people and its resources and its know-how to connect with communities and solve problems that are relevant and important to the communities.
In times of financial difficulty or political uncertainty, things like responsible business or sustainability can be seen as like a sort of luxury extra rather than a necessity. But I think at these times, if at all possible, that's when you need it more than ever. And that's something also that His Royal Highness and business in the community have been so good about, trying to just keep people on course through the good and the bad times.
This notion of combining the private sector, the public sector, and place together to solve the problems that were most important for that community.
We visited some of the schools that Mosaic was working in and also planning on working in, as well as the Muslim Youth Helpline. And so we got to see firsthand, one, what the needs were, what could really make a difference, and two, the benefits of mentoring.
The Seeing and Believing visits are ways of getting the boss class to bits of town they wouldn't normally go to, and they go there because the Prince leads them and shows by example that these are things they should know about.
The impact of his leadership has been all about being prepared to stand up for what you believe in.
He thinks it's the right thing to do. He gets on with these kind of action man. So the scale of business in the community is in good measure due to him.
There's 25,000 business leaders have been on Seeing is Believing. Think of the impact of that. Just think of the global impact of that.
Seeing is Believing is an incredibly powerful program, and it's something that business in the community should do forever.
I think young people today expect it, and it's the right mirror to hold up to businesses.
It's all about creating a more sustainable and better life for the people of the United Kingdom.
Won't be forgetting no time soon what I've been shown. All doom and gloom no more, my future's a bit more sure. All the tours and what's been taught has took us to the fore, and what's been learned and earned will cause the state of things to turn. Hope to heaven that I'll grow to be as sharp as he is at 70, to look back on a legacy as bold and old as just a dream. But hopefully with luck and work, a bit of grit, a bit of dirt, and blood and sweat, each challenge met, what's hard and set can soften wet. From Toxteth town what covered ground, when all around and so it grew. Who would have known? Who could have knew that it would do what it would do? From towns and farms and city dwells, the Prince of Wales held all them up. Imams and priests and schools, the tools you'll need will find all wholly thine. Water, wine and waste to wealth, from here to there and all about. And what a shout to take it far and wide to all that heed the call. To grab the bull by all the horns and make the most of little life. To serve as many as you can, increase the number, grow the span. From where you were to where you am, took strength of mind and might of hand. Who knows how things might all have panned without the ones who thought and planned. Of global health and local wealth, environment and state of things, to turn the losses into wins by great virtue of him. Who did what must, to instill trust and make the start to make the change. Your vision is a wondrous thing, the one that we salute today.
Your Royal Highness, no birthday's complete without a present, and we all recall. Don't worry, I haven't baked a cake. We all recall when you were 50. You said that you had 50 ex-offenders roles, and so that meant it was able to track the reoffending of those 50. So it made total sense that on behalf of the trustees, 70 roles for ex-offenders are now made, and we will track them and work with them so that they get a very different start to their very different future of their lives. So here's to you, and happy birthday.
Okay, great stuff. So now I'm going to ask Thomas to come back on stage. Can I ask everybody else please just to stand whilst His Royal Highness and the Secretary of State leave, and then Thomas will introduce the next panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you to all of you. Can I add my thanks to His Royal Highness and the Secretary of State. Panel, you're released. Thank you very much indeed to you. Cheers. And we'll clear the decks for our next panel. I was going to tell you about my microwave because it does seem to encapsulate so many of the problems we have at the moment. It's a shiny microwave with lots of stainless steel. It's only 2 years old, but it's missing 3 wires in the timer, which means you can't read the time. Now, as a function of a microwave, that's fairly important because you don't know how long the stuff is actually going to cook for. And that's the absurdity, because once upon a time, I'd be able to take that to somebody in a garage, and they'd fit a new part, and that microwave would lead on. But these days, of course, the expectation is that we will throw that microwave away. And that's the kind of challenge that we need to meet in the years to come, because we can't keep wasting a beautiful, shiny, stainless steel microwave simply because it's missing 3 wires. So thank you to everybody who's taken part so far. Can I introduce the next panel? We're going to continue with the summit now. This is a panel about innovation. So if I can ask you all to come on stage. Heidi, if you go there, actually. Jaideep. So if I can introduce them. So on my right here, we've got Jaideep Prabhu, who is Professor of Marketing at the Judge Business School at the University of Cambridge. We've got Heidi Mottram, who's the CEO of Northumbrian Water. Guy Granger, Chief Executive of Europe, Middle East and Africa at the property consultancy JLL. And on the end, Tim Doubleday, CFO for Burger King. Jaideep, you talked to me before about innovation, the importance of innovation, and you work both in the developing world and also here in Europe, in the UK. How does the picture of innovation change?
So, you know, I've spent my career studying innovation, and in the first part of my career, I studied innovation in large Western companies, where over the 20th century, innovation has been done in a structured way. It's quite expensive. It's often technology for the sake of technology. And then I turned my attention to developing countries like India, where I'd grown up, and I realized that there, innovation was done in a different way. It was very frugal. People were trying to do the best they could with limited resources, and it was quite unstructured. And so I became interested in this notion of frugal innovation, doing more and better with less.
And how does that change things, though? Because I've been to India, I've seen waste pickers there, and they will harvest off everything of value within that pile of rubbish.
So the sheer pressure of resource constraints makes people think in this creative way about how to make use of resources. And large numbers of people work in and live in the informal economy, so they make a living out of collecting rags, paper, scraps, and then selling it on back into the supply chain. And you were mentioning repairs. So there are people who make a living out of repairing things. Mobile phones, for instance, don't get tossed away typically, they get repaired. So your microwave, for instance, might have got repaired. Or ships go to India to die. they land up in beaches where they're recycled by these people.
So, I mean, you talked about how necessity is the mother of all invention, and I suppose that is the case. Very true in India, isn't it? But how does it change when you come and look at a country like the UK?
So, just in India too, we've described what happens at a very low-tech end. But now technology is entering the picture. Things, ubiquitous technologies like mobile phones. And they've had a transformative effect on reduction of waste or improving how we recycle. So take food waste, for instance. So in India now, fishermen, for instance, will have mobile phones. And we've seen the effect of mobile phones on their ability to now choose where they will take their fish back. So previously, before mobile phones, they would just guess and go to the nearest market, and then often you would have a glut in the market, there wouldn't be enough buyers, and they'd have to toss their fish. Now they can do that more intelligently. Similarly, farmers can get text messages in the morning on their phone when they're in the field and can decide where to sell their crops. So that reduces food waste. But we see food waste in the West too, in a different part of the supply chain. We see food waste in homes, and often this is because people might stock up more than they can use, and then will throw away the food when it gets past the use-by date and so forth. But now we have people's ability to, and we were talking about the fourth industrial revolution, you have startups that might come up with new ideas, apps that will help people make better use of, for instance, food. So there are these companies where you can order your meals for the week and they will deliver a box which has got just the ingredients that you need for that week. So it's less likely that you will waste food.
Heidi, I mean, many people wouldn't really think of water as a place you could really innovate, but you have at Northumbrian Water, haven't you?
Yes, I mean, I was really struck by, you know, some of the early conversations about it's the change of mindset, isn't it, that really brings about innovation. And the big one that really did it for us was changing our minds about sewage from seeing it as a waste into seeing it in a resource. And we've, on a very short space of time, transformed into 100% of the conversion of our sewage now into biomethane.
Power from poo.
Power from poo. I mean, I'll give you a fabulous fact to take home to your kids. The average human poo can light a light bulb for 15 minutes. How cool is that? I'm not sure how much it would do after a good curry one night, but you know, it's an amazing resource, and now, you know, and a great example of the circular economy, because, you know, you give us your contributions, we turn it into biomethane, a few days later it's going to go back into the gas grid and you're going to cook your dinner again, and away it goes. It's amazing.
Northumbrian Water really has led on this, and the other water companies are following, but it all stemmed from a trip that one of your employees made to Germany and saw a pilot plant over there.
That's right. I mean, we were struggling with it, you know. I mean, the stuff keeps coming, and what are we going to do? So we were trying to think differently, and yeah, one of our guys was looking at farm-based technology in Germany and seeing this on a small scale, and what we thought was, can we just really scale this up and do it differently? And so the first plant, which went onto Teesside in 2010, it's about a £50 million investment, but huge scale, you know, the huge scale you see here as well. Fabulous success, and so we went and did it again in Newcastle, and that's why 100% conversion. So if you're in the northeast, thank you for your contributions.
Guy, I mean, the construction industry has a huge environmental footprint, and I think you were telling me before that I think 8% of the world's carbon emissions come from concrete.
Yeah, that's right. I think people underestimate, we talk about consumers in terms of people in their homes, but actually the built environment contributes a lot towards the negative carbon emission. I mean, actually the total built environment in terms of buildings, 40% of carbon emissions comes from buildings, and yeah, concrete is a big contributor. I mean, half of the resources we take out of the earth every year gets used in construction of buildings or infrastructure. So it's a massive impact, but you know, it goes, what we get involved in, the reason why we're a champion on this cause is it's not just about the design and construction of buildings, but it's also how you use them. So there's also lots of waste that comes out of the workplace, and a lot of the innovation that could be done around that is actually simple. I mean, you can use technology. A lot of the innovation around getting rid of paper, we had a campaign in our business called Pulp Fiction to really get rid of paper. Now, it pulled on the emotional tie, but we also enabled people with technology tools so they could avoid using paper. And that was uplifting on two counts, both in terms of the social impact, but also in terms of people actually engaging with technology much better, which is a big challenge for employers.
And you're really keen on making use of buildings better, that they're flexible enough to change with the demands of the future as well. So you're using that carbon input much more wisely.
Yeah, and I think in the UK we've got a long way to go, if I'm honest. Sweden, Netherlands is great at this, actually. The first business park has been developed in Netherlands, Park 2020. It's cradle to cradle. Zero waste. Every building on that park can be disassembled and reassembled. I mean, it's a true circular economy. And the incredible thing about that, the advanced thinking, is it's not just sustainable. Actually, they're driving far higher returns per square foot than any other development, because businesses want this. This is a real aspiration for businesses. When the biggest challenge out there for businesses is actually to attract and retain talent, what better way than to say our office is in a complete circular economy? This is really attractive to people.
Tim, at Burger King, you have a direct front with consumers, and sometimes fast food companies, you get a pretty poor rap, don't you? I mean, how's Burger King trying to shape its brand to meet the demand that's so clearly coming from consumers now?
I would start by saying that it's actually the hospitality industry. If you look at the industry overall, you know, we are 2.9 million employees, the third largest, you know, private sector employer. So this is a big issue across the whole of hospitality. And you know, Burger King as a brand, we're on a journey. And we've taken the attitude that the best waste is the waste that you don't create in the first instance. So we've started by reducing this year 30% of the plastics in our business, 40% of the packaging in our business. So it matters to us to do that, and it matters because our consumers, as we saw with you know, plastics on the television this summer, consumers are asking, and we have a lot of millennial consumers, and we have a lot of millennial employees as well who are demanding answers from not just Burger King, but from the whole sector.
You're CFO, so does it make good financial sense?
It does. There are lots of things that you can do that, you know, have that piece where you actually save money as well as doing the right thing. But I think overall, you know, waste management, the whole ESG agenda is now a C-suite problem, and it's something that the C-suite has to look at. And CFOs have in the past been seen as blockers to that happening, and that shouldn't be the case. They should be there to champion that cause.
But you've done some of the easy stuff already. You've replaced your lighting with LED bulbs and so on. That's an obvious place to start, but there are many more challenges that lie ahead. And I suppose for a company like you, or certainly franchisees, there are so many, that the supply chain is often global these days.
It is, and looking at how we are actually actively bringing the supply chain more to the UK. So that we can actually reduce the amount of carbon impact that we have, but also it's looking at how that supply chain is relevant to our consumers, but also how we can continue to manage that going forward, so that we can influence our suppliers. For example, single-use plastic is a big issue in the whole supply chain, and there's a crossover between food preservation and single-use plastic. So you have to be very careful about unintended consequences as you look to manage that.
But is it only about making the bottom line look nice and healthy, or is there something broader than that now that companies really need to engage in?
I think it's much more broad than that. Yes, yeah. I think if you look at, I mean, you can argue, yes, focus on the bottom line, focus on cost control, but actually, if your consumer is talking about it, then you have to react overall to that and actually be attractive business for your consumer. So actually where the brand looks and the brand feels will be the biggest driver, I think, for waste to wealth for the consumer.
And you talked about it on the last panel, but this commercial viability is a really important point, because I think listed companies, now we're a listed company and you're held to account, but as a private company, you're not. So you really have to make the commercial case for it as well. And I think this is where the language we're talking about today is really relevant. Make waste a real opportunity.
And so in the private sector, I mean, we are private equity backed. And if you talk to private equity companies now, there is a lot of pressure on private equity companies through the UNPRI particularly to be seen to be advancing the ESG agenda. So I agree that the public companies are very much in the eye, but if you look at all the legislation that's coming in there, it will get rapidly pushed down the supply chain, and all private companies will have to react to enable public companies to report on what they're doing.
Guy, I wanted to ask you, from a buildings, construction point of view, and so much needs to be done at the planning stage. And you were telling me about Park 2020 in Amsterdam and how companies co-locate. So you can actually put companies together that can use resources from each other?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think it's really important, and that is starting to happen in the UK as well. Even the very sort of furniture that you use in the building, we've done our first relocation for Grant Thornton, actually, where zero waste from that relocation went to landfill. Now that's unusual and it's aspirational, but it's actually quite easy to achieve. It's about using as much of the current stock that you have in your inventory. But if you can't, then it's having a supply of other things that have been recycled. And sometimes businesses can interact with that a bit more. I think how you use the space going forward is extremely important. And there are lots and lots of innovations that you can use. I mean, in the workplace, most workstations are empty 60% of the time, right? And so you can adjust your whole energy strategy. You can use technology to track that. But even simple things about the way you use, you should be able to apply what you do at home to work. You know, take away everyone's bin by their desk, set up recycling bins. All of a sudden, people think about what they're using. So you start the decision making at the very beginning of, you know, what you use and how you recycle it. There are lots and lots of simple things we can do, but it has to be done on scale. I think that's the big difference.
And you're doing work with BITC on the circular office, on exactly this.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's everything from construction, design, right through to how you use, you know, simple things that you can do, case studies, examples. We work with HSBC in 15 countries by simply taking away the cups next to water coolers. We've stopped them using 21 million cups, right? 21 million plastic cups have been taken out of circulation. This is really, I mean, I think it is innovative, but it's really simple. You're taking choices away, but you're doing it in a very thoughtful way, which has big impact in the end. And the Circular Office Guide, what we're trying to do at JLL with BITC, is to set out some really, really simple guidelines and some case studies of where it's worked.
And again, at HSBC, you're actually using technology to turn off the lights remotely. Again, another simple step where you make
I mean, massive energy savings, up to $20 million a year we're saving that. And you can do this. There's lots of technology. I'd say it's the fastest moving prop tech sector around how energy is used in buildings. And you can use a lot of predictive analysis on that and digitally track it. For HSBC, not only the energy, we digitally track how much waste goes to recycling. So, and they are truly held accountable, and they release that to their staff. You know, this is very much something that brand wants to represent, and they want to be able to show that they're hitting their targets.
JD, and how important, I mean, accountability is going to be a big thing in the years to come, isn't it? That companies really need to show that they're being responsible in the way they're taking resources and dealing with the waste. What have you seen that gives you the encouragement that we have the tools in place to actually do that?
So I think there's a very interesting sort of ecosystem that's developing between the large companies, the smaller startups, and consumers. So when you talk to large companies, and many of them are here in the room, you know, they say that it's in their best interest to think sustainably. They can reduce their costs, they can reduce their waste if they think about this systematically. And in many cases, they've reached, you know, they've gone as far as they can. But they realize that a big part of their footprint is in the home, in the way consumers or business customers might use their products and services. So, for instance, Nestle might say that, you know, people might boil a whole kettle when they want to make a cup of tea. Or Unilever might talk about how consumers may have 10-minute showers when a 5-minute shower may do. So how do you change the behavior of humans, how they use these products and services in the home and make them more responsible? I think Klaas said, make it simpler. So now you have startups, and often our students now are empowered to do more with less. They have the tools to be able to do things which only large companies could do before, and they're often also environmentally conscious. So they're developing apps and, you know, these kinds of solutions to help people change their behavior. They're nudging these people in the homes to change their behavior. Now, often they can be very innovative and creative, but then they hit a wall when they try to scale these solutions because they don't necessarily have the resources. And that's where I think there could be very interesting partnerships with larger companies which may have the resources but may not be as nimble. So I think you see this very interesting ecosystem where large companies, startups, and consumers need to, in a sense, work together to solve these problems.
And Heidi, what you've been doing in the Northumbrian Water really encapsulates all that, because you have innovated and you recognise that perhaps not all the smartest ideas come from the board. You need to go outside the business. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and we wanted to do that in a way that would really inspire people and get themselves into that kind of, you know, fun, creative place to get the very best out of them. So it literally was an idea that was had in a shower, a 4-minute shower, of course, that we might bring people together in a festival style, which I think is something we do brilliantly in this country, So we set that up in Newcastle, kind of Glastonbury meets technology thing, and just invited anybody who thought that they would be able to have a contribution. We started tweeting out using social media. These are the ideas we're going to think about. These are the issues we're going to try and solve. If you think you've got something to contribute, show up. We're going to be here. We're going to be here all week, and this is how it could work. And I think that whole kind of power of bringing supply chain, yes, small companies, big companies, charities, not-for-profit sectors. We had everybody and started to come up with ideas that we never thought we were going to come up with at all. So one of the sprints was working, for example, on how to just generally green cities. And through some research, we came up with this idea of a moss tree.
A moss tree?
A moss tree, yes. And
Not
you
connected
can now,
to water, obviously.
Not at all connected to water, nothing at all to do with us. And you can now go and see the moss tree in Newcastle. It's in the centre of Newcastle. And the idea, the concept is that a moss tree, which is a big moss panel, can actually take 275 times more pollution out of the atmosphere than an ordinary tree. And we wanted to test that because this had been done in some labs, but we wanted to scale it up. And so it's there, and it's got sensors all over it, and we're starting to find and some really good initial results, although actually some quite scary initial results, because we thought it would tell us about, nitrous oxide and things like that. What it's telling us is we're all breathing in car tyres, which is not great, is it? But that was really through collaboration, through thinking differently, and through also trying to address challenges that weren't specifically to do with the water company.
But when you start thinking about that, the environment is all tied in, the air, the water, and everything, that what you're managing to suck out of the air in Newcastle means that that's not falling on your catchment areas for your water supply.
You're so right, and that is something that we've learned definitely in the last few years, is that water, we need to think about where our water comes from. I mean, water is the ultimate cycle. It falls, we use it, we discard it, it goes back and round again. But what we put into the atmosphere that touches it, whether it's upon the moors and the colour that goes into it, whether it's what farmers put in with real challenges with the pesticides, and how we work in partnership with farmers to get those things out. Plastics now, which we're all becoming just that much more aware of as well, is making sure that they're not in the system so that we don't have to take them out. And
do you think by going to the community for some of these ideas, and with the wonderful idea of having festivals as well, do you think it ties you much more closely to the people you serve? And if we are going to transition towards a more sustainable economy with businesses and communities working in tandem, this is one way of doing it in the future.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We've heard it so many times, haven't we, in the conversation this morning, this idea of people power and what people want now, and what their kind of sensibility or their awakening. People are wanting to get involved in this. We had customers as part of the festival. we invited them to come on the first day, just to have a look, and about half of them wouldn't go home. And they were there at the end of the week, just getting involved, wanting to make a difference, challenge us. As big companies, because there's quite a few technology companies and big supply chains there, think differently. This is what we want. It's important to the brand. You made that point. Let's work on this together, and let's see what can be done to make a difference for all of us.
Guy, Jalil has stepped up as a waste to wealth champion. Why? What's in it for you, and what's in it for everybody else?
Well, I mean, it's not just about making a difference. I mean, we have got a big sort of global platform of facilities management people, so we're absorbing a lot of data on this about how buildings are being used, and we just, very connected to the built environment, sometimes think it's a part of the whole ecosystem that gets missed. We talk about manufacturing and distribution and supply chain a lot of the time, but it's right on our doorstep, and it's happening right in our workplaces, and people can relate to workplaces because most people, not everyone, but most people work in an office. And I think that with our platform and the fact that we are setting ourselves our own targets, we want to go out there and actually spread the word, but also try and deliver on some of these things. We can bring case studies, not just for occupiers. There are some investors that are, as long as they've got scale, Crown Estate is a great example of that here in the UK, who are really putting a lot into the sustainability story. And it's important for others to see, as the point was made earlier, leaders of industry making a stand on this and drawing out some case studies which not only show how a brand can become more admired and a greater place to work, but also the commercial success stories out of it. So that's why we want to make a stand on it.
Because it also is showing employees that this is what the company is about, isn't it? If you create a workplace where there is the right feel, then
Yeah.
it adds value to as a place to work.
And honestly, we talk about millennials a lot, but I don't think this is a millennial thing. I think with every generation, the feeling gets stronger and more passionate. However, I think this affects all people. I think there's a difference between the educated and the non-educated on this, so there is a responsibility on us to educate people about the impact, but I think this is generational agnostic. I think everyone cares.
And Tim, Burger King also a waste to wealth champion. What can you offer other businesses in the room?
I think it's taking that leadership that's important. His Royal Highness put it very well in terms of why it matters. And I think from our perspective, in the hospitality sector, we are a well-known brand, and we need to show that leadership in that hospitality sector. From a personal perspective, I'm also chairing the environment leadership team for business in the community. So I'm working with business in the community to actually, the team have pulled together this event and to look at how we can actually take those commitments forward.
So the environmental leadership team, and what support can you offer businesses that are making sometimes a very challenging transition to what we're asking them to do?
Yeah, so within the environment leadership team, so the environment team has 3 task forces. The circular economy one, which you've talked extensively about, the circular office, which has been a fantastic achievement. One on water, and also now carbon and climate. And what we're looking to do is bring more people in to work with us on those particular projects. And really from today, we are everyone from today will receive an email. Their corporate advisors will be in touch over the next 2 weeks. A number of people have obviously signed up to the commitments, and if you haven't, we'd encourage you to do so. And then what business in the community will do is actually provide that expertise to the champions to actually start to work up the agenda in each of those in each of those sectors as we go forward, to then start to report on some commitments and some real tangible actions for next year.
But the important message is that businesses, members, are not alone on this journey.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Business in the community is there to bring members together, to collaborate, to help us to support each of the champions in what hopefully we can achieve over the next 12 years.
Johnny, from your perspective, a global perspective, 3 smart companies doing smart things.
Yeah, and I think, you see this kind of ingenuity and this commitment from around the world, and increasingly business is also global. Ideas travel and ideas get shared and people get inspired. So, I really think that this is a global issue. Around the world, people are applying themselves, whether they're in smaller companies or whether they're in larger companies, they're applying themselves to this problem. I think it's a mindset issue where we've got to shift from thinking of it as a problem to think of it as an opportunity of economic value, where we can apply our ingenuity to solve these problems. And that's why innovation is such an exciting way to think about this. It's how do you, use what you have to make the most, how do you do more and better with less?
Thank you very much indeed. And we're surrounded by material which hopefully is going to go to a good home and come back in a second life. But I just want to thank the panel. Thank you very much indeed to all today's speakers. Now, as we've heard, this is a hugely important challenge, and it's rightly the responsible business network that leads the charge. So a quick summary of what happens next. As Amanda outlined to you, you'll be sent a waste to wealth commitment to sign. If you haven't already signed it, please do. You'll have seen from the times that some companies have already done so. BITC will also follow up with a program of events that begin to address some of the challenges that we've been talking about today. And we can all look forward to a progress report when we come back in a year's time. Thank you to Veolia for lending us your facility. They're going to be starting up the machines very soon after we vacate these seats. It has been certainly a very powerful environment, really, to get our heads around the challenges that lie ahead. Thanks also to the London Waste and Recycling Board for helping, along with everyone else involved, to make this as sustainable an event as possible. Now, please do make your way back into the marquee to have some lunch, and indeed some 70th birthday cake specially made by Greg's. And take the opportunity to walk around the Innovation Centre exhibition, where there'll be plenty of people to meet you. And indeed, there are people from BITC there. If you have got questions about today's event, what you can do, please go and talk to them. Now, thank you all for coming. I hope you're inspired. Now go do. Thank you.